Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about my book recommendation from 2023. Yes, in the year 2023, my book recommendation was The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. Now, generally speaking, we have a YouTube video that people have already read, or at least maybe it's an audio something. So it's an audio version, and we probably would play that. But I'm going to take this time to, wait a few seconds so that maybe we'll get a thumbnail that looks something like this. All right, that's good. Okay, scrolling. Oh, no. Okay, enable scrolling. Okay, maybe zoom out just a little bit. Okay, The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, translated from the French by John Wilkinson, with an introduction by Robert K. Merton, professor of sociology at Columbia University. Vintage Books, a division of Random House, New York. Scrolling. Statement from the publisher. I would never have heard of this book and its author were it not for my friend W.H. Ferry. Pause.
Blackstone Publishing presents The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, translated by John Wilkinson, with an introduction by Robert K. Merton. This book is read by Arthur Morey. Statement from the publisher. I would never have heard of this book and its author were it not for my friend W.H. Ferry, Vice President of the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions of the Fund for the Republic, Inc., at Santa Barbara, California. Sometime in 1961, Robert M. Hutchinson told Aldous Huxley of the Center's interest in technology and asked his opinion about contemporary European works on the subject. Huxley recommended above all Ellul's La Technique, which had works on the subject. Huxley recommended above all Ellul's La Technique, which had been published in Paris by Armand Collin in 1954, without having attracted much attention. At any rate, the copies of the French original, which the Center hastened to procure, were from the first edition, as was also the copy I secured after my old friend Ferry had written me about it. I couldn't possibly read Ellul's French, which, apart from the matters with which he deals, is very difficult. But since Scott Buchanan and Columbia's distinguished sociologist Robert K. Merton both said the book deserved publication in English, and since Mr. Buchanan had a translator at hand in John Wilkinson of the Center staff, who was willing to tackle this difficult and almost sure to be thankless job, I committed our firm to an undertaking that I soon began to call Knopf's Folly. Members of the Center met Ellul in Greece in 1961, where he attended a conference as the Center's guest and read a paper he had written at their request. They later paid him for a new introduction he had written for the American edition of La Technique, and the Center also helped to defray some extraordinary expenses incurred by Professor Wilkinson in the course of his work. I wish belatedly to thank the Center publicly for all they did to help us with one of the most difficult editorial tasks Alfred A. Knopf, Inc. has ever undertaken. This note should have appeared in our first printing, and I am sorry it did not.
Okay, so this was just a bit of a brief statement from the publisher saying, okay, well, when it comes to our work as an aggregator, I mean, so much is about that hypergraph edge as a content consumer. What brings you to content? What brings you to new information, new connections, insights, and inspiration? So for me, this is one of my for 2023. This was our book recommendation of the year. the technological society. So many things were going on during this time period. But for me, it was super synchronistic in terms of having access to this book right around the time when ChatGPT got introduced, and we learned about large language models and transformers and attention is all you need, but also that technical gradient in terms of this ongoing battle between a prophet and a wizard, in terms of Charles C. Mann's analogy. Uh, yeah, in terms of how he contextualized these different views, and also how I take it a step further and seek to relate that back to the question of psychological types, in terms of the techno optimists versus uh, people that might signal for an eventuality including post growth, and everywhere in between those, the two poles of that spectrum, in terms of functional extinction being on the table to a techno optimist place. So next, so this was okay. The Technological Society, and the publisher was just like, "Hey, yo, what? Like, how for you as a consumer is like, okay, well, as content creators, we talk about specific content that's useful, that's valuable to us, but the publisher saying, hey, yo, what? I wouldn't even have known from the democratic institutions of the Fund of the Republic, saying, hey, gotta check this out. Yo, this was in French, so thank you for the English translation. So that was a little bit of backstory, a little bit of soft backstory, and now we're gonna jump into the forward.
Forward. In the Technological Society, Jacques Ellul formulates a comprehensive and forceful social philosophy of our technical civilization. Less penetrating than Thorstein Veblen's The Engineers and the Price System, it nevertheless widens the scope of inquiry into the consequences of having a society pervaded by technicians. Ellul's book is more colorful.
Okay, so wait, I actually want to pause, right? Because we're trying to understand our content meta. So it's one thing to just consume this as second order React content, just reacting to the text in and of itself. It's another thing to process and internalize the material, but also to hold space for these hypergraph references. When I saw this visually on the screen, I thought to myself, okay, well that's an example of how we would kind of expand and contract our domain awareness by actually following these hypergraph references when specific references that we don't know about or don't understand are made relevant. So in this case, we would actually take this as a point to go on a search journey to actually figure out, well, what is Thorstein Veblen's The Engineers and the Price System, and we very may well double back to that. So if you're interested in an exploration along this line, leave a comment in general or on the Comments Dash channel, and we might check it out. Picking back up.
Colorful and incisive than Oswald Spengler's Man and Techniques, which by contrast seems faded and unperceptive, and it is more analytical than Lewis Mumford's trilogy. Although Ellul handles the historical evidence much more sparingly and with less assurance than Mumford, and it is more far-ranging and systematic than Siegfried Gideon's Mechanization Takes Command, which of all the books overlapping Ellul's subject comes close to giving the reader a sense of what the dominance of technique might mean for the present and the future of man. In short, whatever its occasional deficiencies, the Technological Society requires us to examine anew what the author describes as the essential tragedy of a civilization increasingly dominated by technique. Despite Ellul's forceful emphasis upon the erosion of moral values brought about by technicism, he has written neither a latter-day Luddite tract nor a sociological apocalypse. He shows that he is thoroughly familiar with the cant perpetrated by technophobes and for the most part manages to avoid their cliches. Indeed, he takes these apart with masterly skill to show them for the empty assertions they typically are. Neither does he merely substitute a high moral tone or noisy complaints for tough-minded analysis. His contribution is far more substantial. He examines the role of technique in modern society and offers a system of thought that, with some critical modification, can help us understand the forces behind the development of the technical civilization that is distinctively ours. Enough of Ellul's idiosyncratic vocabulary has survived the hazards of transoceanic migration to require us to note the special meanings he assigns to basic terms. By technique, for example, he means far more than machine technology. Technique refers to any complex of standardized means for attaining a predetermined result. Thus, it converts spontaneous and unreflective behavior into behavior that is deliberate and rationalized. The technical man is fascinated by results, by the immediate consequences of setting standardized devices into motion. He cannot help admiring the spectacular effectiveness of nuclear weapons of war. Above all, he is committed to the never-ending search for the one best way to achieve any designated objective. Ours is a progressively technical civilization. By this, Ellul means that the ever-expanding and irreversible rule of technique is extended to all domains of life. It is a civilization committed to the quest for continually improved means to carelessly examined ends. Indeed, technique transforms ends into means. What was once prized in its own right now becomes worthwhile only if it helps achieve something else. And conversely, technique turns means into ends. Know-how takes on an ultimate value. The vital influence of technique is, of course, most evident in the economy. It produces a growing concentration of capital, as was presciently observed by Marx. Vast concentrations of capital require increasing control by the state. Once largely confined within the business firm, planning now becomes the order of the day for the economy as a whole. The dominance of technique imposes centralism upon the economy, despite comparatively inconsequential efforts to decentralize.
Okay, so since we're just getting started here, eventually I'm gonna have to stop. Maybe I'm gonna be highlighting. Maybe we're gonna actually talk about what we're experiencing as we try to understand like what is actually going on here, what is being talked about, and what do I think about what's going on. Also, how can listening to this recording shape your understanding as a consumer as I try to walk myself through where I'm at in this, what, probably, I think we have at least 30 hours in, but it's been a while since we doubled back to actually say, okay, well, let's try to start from the beginning to the end, or at least to do an introduction of the first 10 pages or so. So we're probably gonna re-rack this whole paragraph.
Individual whole planning now becomes once largely confined within the business firm. Planning now becomes the order of the day for the economy as a whole. The dominance of technique imposes centralism upon the economy, despite comparatively inconsequential efforts to decentralize individual industrial firms. For once technique develops beyond a given degree, there is no effective alternative to planning. But this inevitable process is impersonal. Only the naive can really believe that the worldwide movement towards centralism results from the machinations of evil statesmen. The intellectual discipline of economics itself becomes technicized. Technical economic analysis is substituted for the older political economy, included in which cannot only planning centralism upon the.
Okay, so what is going on here? This is the forward, and they're saying, okay, so I guess maybe this is the author or the editor saying, okay, well, hey, this is what's going on here. So what are we talking about when we're talking about the technological society? I made references to advancements in AI as a form of technique, but we're going into like the actual history of these, and we're going to highlight these. Let's pick an interesting color. Okay, here we go. And leave a comment if you'd prefer a different color. Actually, do. Okay, yeah. Highlighting these. It's really crucial. Very interesting. Okay, so despite erosion of moral values. Okay, well I guess maybe I'm jumping ahead. They're probably going to describe this later on. But it's yeah, I'm trying to figure as a content consumer or excuse me, a creator, as a consumer, we would just go through this and we would say, okay, well, let's stop when I have an issue where I think, okay, did I understand that? Hey, well, actually, the way I consume material,
the dominance of tech now becomes the
I might actually back it up a few times. So that's growing pains to learn. But it was interesting getting here where I felt chopped up a little bit, where we were talking about, okay, the vital influence of technique. So this was interesting in terms of giving my perspective. I remember when I first started consuming this, it was in between sleeping and wake states. So I just remember drifting off to sleep and hearing this term technique. And I was like, yo, what is technology? What are we talking about? Technology? What do you mean technique? So that's an interesting linguistic point plane vector, if you will. The use of this heuristic of technique at large and how it's sort of developed, and how it's been deployed as a reflection of human culture involving language and action and effects with regards to an environment.
Order of the day for the economy as a whole. The dominance of technique imposes centralism upon the economy, despite comparatively inconsequential efforts to decentralize individual industrial firms. For once technique develops beyond a given degree, there is no effective alternative to planning. But this inevitable process is impersonal. Only the naive can really believe that the worldwide movement towards centralism results from the machinations of evil statesmen. The intellectual discipline of economics itself becomes technicized. Technical economic analysis is substituted for the older political economy, included in which was a major concern with the moral structure of economic activity. Thus, doctrine is converted into procedure. In this sphere, as in others, the technicians form a closed fraternity with their own esoteric vocabulary. Moreover, they are concerned only with what is, as distinct from what ought to be. Politics, in turn, becomes an arena for contention among rival techniques. The technician sees the nation quite differently from the political man. To the technician, the nation is nothing more than another sphere in which to apply the instruments he has developed. To him, the state is not the expression of the will of the people, nor a divine creation, nor a creature of class conflict. It is an enterprise providing services that must be made to function efficiently. It is nothing more than another sphere in which to man techniques. The technician sees the nation quite differently from the political man. To the technician, the nation is nothing more than another sphere in which to apply the instruments he has developed. To him, the state is not the expression of the will of the people, nor a divine creation, nor a creature of class conflict. It is an enterprise providing services that must be made to function efficiently. He judges states in terms of their capacity to utilize techniques effectively, not in terms of their relative justice. Political doctrine revolves around what is useful rather than what is good. Purposes drop out of sight and efficiency becomes the central concern. As the political form best suited to the massive and unprincipled use of technique, dictatorship gains in power. And this in turn narrows the range of choice to effectively, not in terms of their capacity to utilize techniques effectively, not in terms of their relative justice. Political doctrine revolves around what is useful rather than what is good. Purposes drop out of sight and efficiency becomes the central concern. As the political form best suited to the massive and unprincipled use of technique, dictatorship gains in power, and this in turn narrows the range of choice for the democracies. Either they too use some version of effective technique, centralized control and propaganda, or they will fall behind. Restraints on the rule of technique become increasingly tenuous. Public opinion provides no control because it too is largely oriented toward performance, and technique is regarded as the prime instrument of performance, whether in the economy or in politics, in art or in sports. Not understanding what the rule of technique is doing to him and to his world, modern man is beset by anxiety and a feeling of insecurity. He tries to adapt to changes he cannot comprehend. The conflict of propaganda takes the place of the debate of ideas. Technique smothers the ideas that put its rule in question and filters out for public discussion only those ideas that are in substantial accord with the values created by technical civilization.
How we find ourselves here in this present moment.
The conflict of propaganda takes the place of the debate of ideas. Technique smothers the ideas that protect and is beset by anxiety and a feeling of insecurity. He tries to adapt to changes he cannot comprehend. The conflict of propaganda takes the place of the debate of ideas. Technique smothers the ideas that put its rule in question and filters out for public discussion only those ideas that are in substantial accord with the values created by a technical civilization. Social criticism is negated because there is only slight access to the technical means required to reach large numbers of people. In Ellul's conception, then, life is not happy in a civilization dominated by technique.
So even the outward show and ask a question before we sign off on this video. In this last statement, where the author or the editor, actually, who wrote the foreword? Yeah, I think the author wrote the foreword, and then there's an introduction from someone else. Okay, so we're dealing with the foreword, and yeah, hopefully in further videos we'll deal with the scrolling issue. Okay, yeah, scroll. Whoa. Scroll. Translators introduction. Okay. And then we get to the contents. Note to reader. Author's forward to the revised American edition. So actually, yeah, it's actually on the YouTube video. It's actually about 40 minutes before we even get into it. This was from a YouTube channel called This Project Is Retired, the Technological Society audiobook. There's some timestamps if you can zoom in that well. Let me try to zoom in so you can see. Whoa. There we go. Okay, if you can see that. Yeah, okay, let's zoom back out. So yeah, this has been an interesting kind of a first go at a piece of work that synchronistically has meant a lot to me as a content consumer, transiting through this area of a fourth dimension, asking myself, okay, well, where are we at within space, within time, and how do we make sense of it, and what contributes to our cultural understanding in terms of culture commentary. For me, specifically, this piece of work has proven very influential to understand the impact of technique on this modern society. When we pick back up, we're going to close out of this forward, and we're going to jump into the translator's introduction, a note to an author, and a few other sections. This has been a a spot read from As an Aggregator. Remember, our main goal on this channel is to introduce content consumers to content that they otherwise wouldn't have reached as quickly just because the hyper edge wasn't there, whether it's relying on an algorithm, relying on friends and family, relying on other content creators out there in the space. As a content curator, we seek to close that gap between you and the content that will change your life. So if you find content to be valuable, then we have curated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours and at least a few thousand titles and thumbnails. So definitely your life will be changed by just spending 5 to 15 minutes scrolling through some of the titles and thumbnails that we've curated. Until next time, this has been As an Aggregator.